guys, it's the Captain here on Andertons TV, and today I've had the great pleasure and honour to meet Mr. Reeves Gabrels, who has just finished some gargantuan six-month world tour.
With The Cure, yeah.
With The Cure. So
not the entire world, but a good chunk of it.
A good chunk of it, everywhere that has good taste in music.
Well, I wouldn't say that. There's a few places that have good taste that we didn't get to this trip, but...
But if you're not familiar with Reeves, he's really, I guess, a very accomplished sort of player who, I guess, was one of the members of Tin Machine. I guess that's where it all kind of
that's where I came
sort of exploded for you, wasn't it? And then went on to stayed with Bowie for a few years after the Tin Machine thing, and then more recently he's done The Cure. So as well as a whole host of other collaborations and things like that. It's okay, we've got someone laying on the floor here, but that's fine. So look, I want to talk to you. I'd love to sort of understand. You're a Staten Island boy.
Yeah. Well, Staten Island. Anybody from Staten Island, like myself and David Johansen from the New York Dolls, and Chasm Sultan from Todd Rundgren, and lots of different people. Meatloaf, and Earl Slick, who played with when I was in grade school. I used to sneak into high school dances to see Slick play. So we all, everyone's convinced there's something in the water.
Right.
On Staten Island.
Yeah, wouldn't drink it though, would you? Not in that kind of water. Anyway.
We'll find out when the tests come in.
So your guitar playing, the sort of stuff that would have inspired you to pick the instrument up with what sort of late 60s kind of what was happening
probably or more late 60s, early 70s. Well, Staten Island, Johnny Winter with Rick Derringer, Johnny Winter and came to a local theater, which was because most of us were too young to travel very far from home. So the fact that in our neighborhood there was a club or a small theater that he played at, and Joe Walsh, James Gang, played at. So those things crept in, and then my father talked me into taking guitar lessons when I was 13 because he thought I was too serious about my schoolwork.
Oh, really?
Yes, which is the
complete
total
opposite to what most people...
And he had a friend from the local corner pub that was a guitar player and a guitar teacher, and the rumor was that he had played with some well-known musicians, but he, I don't think anyone, his name was Turk Van Lake, and he supposedly, at the time, said he'd played with Frank Sinatra and Tommy Dorsey Band and Paul Anka and all of these different American pop jazz singers. And actually, when he passed away, Guitar Player ran a half-page article as an obituary that had the truth about Turk Van Lake, and everything was in fact true. So I studied guitar with him.
Was your dad a player?
He had a banjo, and he could he understood the value of the dominant chord.
Right.
So he could play the tonic, kind of something resembling a 4-chord, and make it to the dominant chord at the right time. And he could convince everybody that he could play because he would sing while he was doing it. And he broke everything down to, everything does kind of break down to tonic and dominant at the end of the day. So
that's wonderful, because I know...
So he was a faker. But
I think that your dad must have been quite an interesting character then, because that typically that generation of people, certainly in England anyway, would have been looking at guitar as the devil's music, and almost going, it's like, don't do that. But your dad,
I grew up on Staten Island, so it was, it was one of the boroughs of New York City. But he was a Southern boy, and I remember I won the first Hot Tuna album, which for anyone that doesn't know about Hot Tuna was Jorma Kaukonen and Jack Cassidy from Jefferson Airplane. But it was their blues foray. Right. And their first album was acoustic blues recorded live in New Orleans, them doing their acoustic thing. And I remember bringing the record home, and it was the one record that I I guess had seen it in like a Circus magazine, had seen it mentioned. So when I won, it was one of those ball toss games, when I actually won enough that I could pick something off the shelf, I picked that and I brought it home. And this was right around the same time that Sticky Fingers came out by the Rolling Stones. And I had it on, and he was walking through the house, and he stopped and he looks at me, he looks at the turntable, and he goes, "When I was your age, I used to have to go to the bad part of town and across the railroad tracks and sneak under the tent flap and hide to listen to the church revivals, to the blues guys who would be doing, and they'd be doing, they were little acoustic blues gigs, like the type that Robert Johnson probably did, or and so he liked the Devil's music, and he also, the joke around the house was he liked both kinds of music, country and western, but blues was in there too, and
he sounds cool.
But he thought that playing guitar would make me more sociable.
And did it?
I think it probably made me more antisocial. That was when I wrote a column in the 90s for a Guitar for the Practicing Musician. I called it Antisocial Guitar because I was kind of rubbing against the norms at the time, which were, at that point, when I started, it was hair metal was waning a little bit, and though it never really went away, and grunge was coming in, and that kind of did go away. But as a nod to my father, I called it Antisocial Guitar because I was in fact, I was kind of functioning as a malcontent in the guitar community, I think.
Did the guitar, were you immediately hooked? Did you devote large chunks of your teenage years to sort of, playing and mastering it?
Well, I realized that, I remember some point in my 20s, I realized that I hadn't made a decision since I was 16 that didn't involve could I play guitar when I went there. Like if I went over a friend's house, or if we actually moved at one point, and it was like, will there be people to play with when I move to this new town? Or, but that wasn't really my decision. That was my parents' decision. I was more hooked than I realized. But I always thought I was a complete the guy least likely. In my mind, I was starting late because all my friends that played started early, like at 8 or 9. I thought, and I, couldn't hear pitches well enough to figure out songs, and I had no time, and I couldn't dance, and so I thought I'm not a natural musician. But when you look back over the long haul of playing guitar for 40 years or whatever, it you realize that was just the wisdom of a 22-year-old thinking I wasn't a natural or what shouldn't be doing this, but I was always doing it anyway. So I don't know.
Obviously there's a chunk of time prior to the Tin Machine stuff where you were active as a professional musician, but you've always played in, I want to use the word unconventional, but I don't. What is it that's attracted you to the kinds of bands that you've ended up working with? Because they're all bands that perhaps aren't necessarily just conventional.
Well, I remember as a kid seeing this guy Alvino Ray, who was kind of Sparky's talking piano thing that Jeff Beck has talked about. It was the American version. It was on this TV show called Lawrence Welk, and I used to watch an American show called Hee Haw with my father, which was all country music, but they were playing live in the studio. So, anybody that I really wanted to be Don Rich, who was the guy that was the guy behind the guy, like
right.
So Don Rich played with Buck Owens, and Don Rich played lead guitar and sang high harmony. And I remember at one festival with Bowie realizing that I was the guy behind the guy playing lead guitar and singing high harmony. I had just gotten the genre completely wrong, But and I was drawn to the electricness of the guitar, and the fact that you could. And even before I had an electric guitar, I had a harmony acoustic, and I used to cut strips of paper and weave it through my strings, so that the notes would buzz like they had distortion, because I didn't know exactly how it was being done, but I would do that. But I went to, when I was university age, I went to art school, and because I wanted to go to music school, but I thought that was impractical, and I wasn't a good enough, and was never going to be a musician. So I went to art school, and while I was at art school, I started taking lessons from John Schofield, who at that point hadn't played with Miles Davis yet, and I just saw an ad but I had seen him play with Billy Cobham and George Duke, and started taking lessons from him, which opened up the guitar harmonically to me. And what Sco has said since is that when I took lessons from him, I already had all the rock tricks figured out. And so he told me, he showed me how to read music, and then started, and plus I had already taken lessons from Turk Van Lake, so he had started me reading music. But Schofield said, listen to the piano players, left hand, and listen to horn players, and stop listening to guitar players. So that sent me down a path. And then he talked me into going to Berkeley in Boston to music school. And I had a natural inclination towards noise making, but I realized that I wasn't going to get the respect to do what I wanted to do unless I could do what the straight musicians could do. Mm-hmm. So I actually, for the fun of it, I had an 11-piece horn band when I was in school. So, which was like it was like a well, in America we had the Tonight Show band, which was probably like like what Jonathan Ross is now, except he had a big band. Yep. And that band was like that kind of band on acid. Yeah. Lots of odd meter stuff and things like that. But I studied horn arranging and all that. And that opened my mind up, especially things like low interval limits, where you're not supposed to play, as you get lower in pitch, especially with brass instruments, the overtone series will clash, so you have to simplify the harmony. So you stick to fifths and fourths as you write for, say, trombone and saxophones, baritone sax. So you simplify the harmony because the overtones will rub because of the harmonic series and the fact that it's the tempered scale versus the non-tempered scale, and trying to average out pitches because of the piano.
And this is all when you're in your early 20s?
This is my late teens.
This is still in your late teens.
And I thought, well, if there's rubs that happen between those notes, if they're telling me not to do it, then maybe there's something in there that I should do. So I got involved with that, and then I started playing, if we fast forward a little, fast forward a little bit, in 1986 I did 188 weddings. So I was playing jazz standards and doing that, and then I was playing the country circuit in Boston, and I was giving guitar lessons. This is all after music school, and I had my own all-original rock band, which didn't work that much, so I had plenty of time to actually work as a musician. And I was working in a music store, so I was meeting other musicians. But the whole gestalt of it, or my whole driving thing was I needed to know how to play all these styles legitimately, so I could make music that was illegitimate. And if somebody said, "Well, you can make noise, but you can't play giant steps," and I could say, "Okay, can I say my?"
You can say anything you like.
I'd say, "Okay, motherfucker, let's play giant steps."
Yeah.
You know, I needed to be able to play. It's like the Billy Sheehan. Well, a lot of people said, but I remember Billy Sheehan saying you have to know all the rules before you break them. So I went on a journey of learning all the rules, and then that gave me a really bad attitude because I was like, yeah, I can play what you're playing, you know, but we're going to play what I want to play, and that's how I ended up here.
But that makes
in a little
lot
room
of, yeah,
with
I mean,
cameras.
Yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense though, because that wanting to push back against what's conventional and what people have said that, you know, this is the way that music should be constructed, and you're going to go, well, there's no such thing as should be constructed. There's only what you like and what you don't like.
Well, yeah, everybody tries to make things legitimate, you know. I mean, we see it where, you know, bands will, after they reach a certain level of success, or, you know, whether it's Metallica or McCartney, they decide to make their record with an orchestra because now I'm legitimate.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, there's also other reasons for that. I don't mean to slag them off, but I never sought legitimacy.
Yeah.
I just sought the skills to be equal or better, you know, and which sounds egotistical, and I don't mean it that way, but I just, you know, even down to my pickups that I put in my guitars back then. I had one of the early sets of you know, the Rat pedal came out in the late 70s, and that was a revelation. That was finally, there's a pedal that doesn't sound like a fuzz box, and it doesn't sound like a tube screamer, which was around, and I don't like tube screamers because they're just like a halfway measure in my mind. And I got the EMG pickups because if I wanted to play with the amount of gain I wanted to play with, the producers and engineers would complain about the noise. So I had the old EMGs that had the letters, and it said EMG instead of the little EMG at the bottom, and not because I was incredibly in love with the sound of those pickups, but because they would not make noise. And those things were, you know, they were all a means to the same end, just like learning to play giant steps. It was so I could do what I wanted without having to take any shit.
Yeah. Now that we're talking about gear, there was a quote I read about you you love to use gear where perhaps it isn't, people aren't going to have a preconception about stylistically what music you're going to play. You know, you like not necessarily the underdog, but it's almost like choose the instrument that people don't expect you to choose rather than the one that they do. In
the Tin Machine days and before that, because I was playing, I had to take out a loan to get my first Steinberger. I liked that because they didn't have history.
Yeah.
And I remember the music store I was working at, Paul Reed Smith was just starting. He used to come in with his guitars. He'd drive his guitars up from Maryland up to Boston and bring guitars into the store.
Yeah.
And he'd be bringing them in, and I got used to seeing him, and I would give him shit because I'd be like, Paul, it's 1983, and you're still making guitars out of wood. You know, like, look at this is graphite. This is the future. And I like the fact that the Steinbergers didn't have a history. And then they develop, you know, you help you become part of the cliche of those instruments in a certain way.
There's a great Tin Machine video of the you and obviously Bowie and the rest of the band in a hotel room. I forget, but I don't know if you've got see-through Steinbergers.
We had I had gotten one made covered with Mylar.
Right.
And then David saw one, and mine was virtually unplayable because they covered the fretboard as well. And then David saw it, and he wanted one. They said, "Oh, we have one that we experimented on first, but we just did the body." And his was completely playable because they didn't coat the fretboard, which always bugged me that he got the one that was playable. But yeah, that guitar sort of became symbolic of the I mean, we knew what we were getting into with Tin Machine. You know, we knew we were going to rub everybody the wrong way. We knew it was. When you listen to it now, it sounds relatively tame, but in 1989 when it came out, it was like the shock of the new.
Yeah.
You know, and we thought rock music was supposed to piss people off. It's just that we were pissing off, you know, guys like, you know, I mean, and we were reacting to Guns N' Roses had come out, you know, because that was radical. A guy with a Les Paul, sunglasses, long curly hair, and leather pants. That's innovative. We've never seen that before in rock, you know. And so our attitude was like, you know, no, you've never seen this. You've never seen.
I remember.
You've never seen a bunch of guys in suits with guitars without headstocks.
The press reaction to Tin Machine was, pretty negative, wasn't it? But not negative necessarily about the music. I just think everyone was like, you know,
well,
you've taken this cherished icon in David Bowie, and it's like, what are you doing? But in a way that was so.
Well, a chunk of
that's how he, that was him, wasn't it? Just like, don't do it, don't do what people expect me to do.
Well, yeah, and I would thought people would have figured that out, especially in the British press, who were probably the most hostile. But again, it was you know, the record sold really well, so we laughed all the way to the bank, you know, and you know, I think the thing was that. The idol worshippers wanted their idol untainted, and the fact that the band was with three Americans didn't help.
And he'd probably just done his most commercial record ever.
Well, it was.
And then did Tin Machine.
It was. He had done Let's Dance, but then there was Tonight and Never Let Me Down, and they both.
Right.
It was a gradual nosedive, so we basically fell on the grenade, you know, and got rid of all future
Took
expectations.
one for the team, did you?
Yeah, you know, and then I continued on with them, and then I switched guitars to Parkers, because another guitar that had no history.
I think that was the first time that I remember seeing you used in press advertising for a brand was the Parker thing. You were definitely there, kind of.
And even
pin-up poster boy.
Even that. Was for a little while when they were associated with Korg and Marshall. Richie Fliegler, who was the artist rep, his comment was, the last thing we need is for Parker guitars to become associated with someone that plays like Reeves Gabrels. So I took that as another compliment. And then eventually I ended up on the back of every guitar magazine holding a Parker, but that was after I think Richie got fired. So, were you using the? Because they had a MIDI version of it. Did you ever go into that sort of territory as well? I had the MIDI version that I used for recording my solo stuff.
Right.
But I never used it with David. And then I went through the '90s as David's musical director and co-writer and guitar player, and then I quit in. Very late 1999 after we finished the Hours record. And then he had talked me into doing a solo record and was going to start his own record label, David. When I say he, I meant David Bowie. And then I finished. I did the record. When I finished the record, I said, I got the record done. He goes, I decided not to do my own record label, so,
Yeah.
So then I found someone else to put it out, and then I opened for the tour we did with Nine Inch Nails. In America, I was opening shows and then playing the last 5 songs with Nine Inch Nails in their set, and then playing the whole set with David every night, which was good because it kept me out of trouble.
Oh, that sounds cool. And then, so... The more recent hookup with The Cure, how did that kind of come around?
Well, I had met Robert when I was the musical director for David's birthday show in 98. I think it was, and his 50th birthday at Madison Square Garden. My job was to go through with all, the songs with all the guests, let's make sure that they knew the songs they were going to play before rehearsal, and so like Lou Reed and the Foo Fighters and Sonic Youth, and Sonic Youth, just let Sonic Youth do what Sonic Youth was going to do. We just had them. We called it the Sonic Youth faucet, where they played along with the rest of us, and we would just bring them in for the noise sections and then dial them back out at the front of house. But I met Robert. He was the last one in, and he was playing a song that we'd written, David and I had written, called "Last Thing You Should Do," from the Earthling record, and then he was doing "Quicksand" with David. And Robert is thorough, and Robert knew the song, so it took about an hour to run through it with him. And then that was a Wednesday, rehearsals started on a Saturday, and at some point on Friday, Robert and I kind of realized that we hadn't been to bed yet, and we went back to our separate hotel rooms and reconvened on Saturday. But we lost a day or two in there, so that friendship started there. And 2012, I was just coming over to England, and I wrote to him because he and I had played on, in the subsequent years after David's birthday show, I played on the track "Wrong Number," which was a Cure single, and a couple of other things. And then he and I and Jason Cooper, the drummer from the Cure, had done a thing for the South Park guys for their movie Orgasmo. And then we, what else did we do? Oh, and then Robert sang, and we wrote a song from my second solo album, which is a really beautiful song. It surprised us when we did it, and it's not like, for all this talk about being a iconoclastic, it was not that.
Right.
And it reminded me in some ways of Bill Nelson, "Crying to the Sky," that song.
Okay.
And called "Yesterday." Our song was called "Yesterday's Gone." And then there's another song that Robert and I wrote on my next solo record, and I sent him an email early 2012 that I was going to be coming over to England. Did he want to get together, maybe write another song for my next record? And he responded more quickly than usual and said, "What are you doing this summer?" And I said, "Well, I told you I was thinking of coming to England." He goes, "No, what are you doing the whole summer?" And so I joined them for that. Ultimately, it boiled down to me having 10 days to learn 52 songs before the first show in front of 70,000 people in Pink Pop in Amsterdam. And I managed to do that. And then they asked me to join the band, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
Nice.
And then Reverend Guitarist showed up, actually, to go back. In 2007, I ran into Ken, and I met Ken and Joe Naylor at a NAMM show. And
well, we talk about your guitars in a minute, because I know it's an exciting kind of tie-up, and you've had quite a bit to do with the signature models and stuff. But I always think that the guys and girls who are kind of watching this always like to try and give them something that they can take away from this. So I'm interested in this songwriting. Yeah, you can give them the cold if you want. But in this kind of this idea that of creating almost a dissonant approach to, when you've got a piece of music that either someone's brought to you and they just want your input on it, or you've got licks going around in your head or whatever like that. What sort of stuff are you trying to play? What kind of notes are you trying to put together that create that sort of disharmony that you're...
Well, it's. I mean, I always view it like more harmony.
Right.
Or like
just a different harmony.
Yeah, it's extra harmony. There was a song, a Tin Machine song actually, that was "I Can't Read," which it's a good simple example. David and I were trying to write. We just started writing the song. We had taken his yacht, his ocean-going yacht from he and I and Gary Oldman had taken his yacht.
Clang, 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 clang.
Had taken his yacht from Mystique we were heading to Venezuela. And so we're on the boat, and David actually has a picture of, we're in the stateroom where I had almost all that early stuff was written on a Tascam Porta 1 cassette deck. And he had one and I had one, and I would just put my cassettes in a little cassette case, and I'd fly to where, because the Tascam Porta 1, which is about the size of a laptop, was just too big to carry. So he had one at his house, and I had one at my house. Well, he brought his to his yacht, and there's a picture of everything looks perfectly normal, except at the moment when the picture was taken, I'm about 4 inches off the ground, and if you look out the window of the stateroom, the ocean is like this. So the boat was in the middle of a big thing, but I'm standing there with the headphones on playing guitar, but I'm up in the air and the boat's at an angle, but the way he was holding the camera, everything looks straight. Anyway, so I don't know if it was because we were in like more tropical climates or the climate or what, but I was thinking, in my head, I was thinking, well, what about like a bossa nova thing, like but like more of a metal, like an Ornette Coleman bossa nova. So I ended up with and that wasn't it, and it ended up becoming. But it came from just. So whatever that process is, I don't know, but sometimes it feels like I'm just pushing.
Does it come back to
that
early education that you had in how you should construct a sort of a big band?
Yeah, I mean the fact that I know how to play a bossa nova, I mean, some guys that like some people that are into, I don't know if Jay Mascis can play a bossa nova, so maybe the difference is the education. I don't know. I mean, which is no diss of Jay Mascis. I love Dinosaur Jr., but and I arrived at that somehow. And then we wanted something that sounded like, originally the chorus was. Instead it became so
the secret is
the skeleton,
lots of distortion.
It's more like you have a skeleton and the distortion might be the meat.
Yeah.
But before you put the meat on the skeleton, you break off a few of its ribs. And that's what you get.
That's the best analogy I think I've ever heard for how to write a song. Come on, let's talk about Reverend then, because that, I, in fairness, is possibly one of your more conventional choices of guitar instrument. But
it might appear so.
Let's get this one over here as well.
Which one would you rather start with? This one?
I don't mind. I mean, I never. Because this is your official signature, isn't it?
Well, no, they're both official signatures. It's just this one has a name.
Right.
This one came first, so.
If you want to, I don't mind.
No, I'll do it in order in the progression of when we designed and built the instruments. I mean, this is basically not terribly different from. I mean, I like the first Reverend I got was the double agent. I just heard another voice. Double agent.
You literally lip sync that perfectly as well.
And this isn't, the body shape isn't different from what the body shape of the double agent was at the time. Nor in the pickups, the only difference is there was a P90 here on that. And I don't think the first one had a tremolo, if I remember correctly. So simple modifications. And then I wanted a true out of phase for the... So I get the Peter Green, B.B. King thing, or plus with distortion, just add distortion and it gets very... It's almost a little bit like, even with just plain old distortion, it's a little bit more like you hear the octave come out.
Yeah.
Like you would if you had
Like
a clean octave boost or a Octavia.
Yeah.
But so this one is fairly conventional. It's in some ways not dissimilar from like what people have called super strats. But the thing about Reverend from the start was all the things that I used to do to make guitars playable, like a Fender, was I would, if it could be avoided, I wouldn't use locking nut.
Yeah.
And I wanted travel on the tremolo. And I find that as the closer you can stay to to the original Strat design, basically, in as much as having a solid, not having a solid base plate with the old style single saddles. There's something about the tonal transfer that happens there, and having the block in the back, hidden under the plate. But this is really just. But it's still in tune.
Yeah.
As in tune as it was when I picked it up. And it essentially is everything that I needed in a guitar, and it was already there. Locking machines, graphite nut, a tremolo that sounds good and stays in tune, and then we added the phase the phase switch, and I like to change the angle on this.
Yeah.
So instead of having a blade switch, we just put a regular toggle in, so anyone that gets it can put it where they want. And then the other secret weapon, I think, in it is the bass roll-off. Like you can turn two humbuckers into a telly sound if you want to.
So that switch on there, I'd always assumed that was a coil split, but it's a phase reverse, is
Yeah,
it? On the...
yep.
So you've gone Telecaster through to...
Yeah. And
cool.
that's with the bottom roll down, so you get more spank out. And this is what I played for quite a few years and still do for songs where I need radical tremolo stuff.
Yeah. That Wilkinson trem is just about the best sort of non-Floyd Rose trem that you can get for that kind of stuff.
Well, I was never a fan of the fussiness of the Floyd Rose, and I had a Strat with a Kaler on it. I think the trem on the original Parker guitars was nice, and that was a one-off innovative design with the axle on each side.
That was a proprietary
completely
Parker thing, wasn't it? Yeah.
And the Steinberger one was good.
Yes.
Until
that was Ned's own design as well, wasn't it?
Until they sold to Gibson, and then I used to go through a tremolo every month or every 2 months because the cam would wear out that the axle went through.
Yeah.
And you tune it up, everything would be fine. The moment you move the bar, it wouldn't return.
Yeah.
You know, nice thing about these is the fact that you've got the knife edge and just two set screws. They come back in tune.
And it needs to be such a hard metal, doesn't it?
Yep. And the fact that you can warble all day long. But the bass roll off has I mean, I used this model guitar up to 2013 with the Cure, and you know, I could get Gretsch-like sounds out of it because some things required that, or Telecaster-like sound. You know, you roll the bottom off, and because the way the tone control, the volume control is on these guitars, when you back off the volume, it doesn't get darker like Gibsons do. You still retain the sparkle, and you get that kind of crinkly Filtertron sound out of it. But from there, once I had
was the satin finish your idea to do?
No.
So that they were just.
It was gloss first, and then I think Ken suggested the satin finish, and I'm not sure if they're still. Are they satin now?
Some are.
Some are. Depends on what you want. Just talk to Ken. He'll make whatever you want.
No, it's a great guitar. I love these pickups too. Love these pickups.
Well, I didn't get into those. Originally, I had just 2 regular Joe Naylor humbuckers, which are like hot PAFs.
Yeah.
And actually, the original guitar just had a P90, which is, I think, the best sounding P90 I've been able to find, and I know guys that pull out the Gibson P90s and put the Joe Naylor ones in there. And then after joining the Cure and realizing that Bigsby, I mean, I've used tremolos enough over the years that I can kind of mimic a Bigsby with a Strat style trem, but I had this thing in my head that I did a record with Bill Nelson. We did a duo record, and I had seen him when I was 18 with Bebop Deluxe, and he had a 345, Gibson 345, with a Bigsby on it.
Yep.
And I got to play it when we were doing a bunch of times, and actually used it on some of the record. But his tremolo was so worn in, though it didn't stay in tune all that well, it was so soft that it reminded me of what I liked about the Kahlers.
Right.
What I liked about the Jazzmaster style tremolos. And I was convinced that, that was probably wear and tear on the spring, that his spring was softer. And I had another friend in Nashville named Nick Kane that played with a group called the Mavericks, and he had a less Black Beauty Les Paul. And he called it his Hillbilly Floyd Rose, because he could go, he could draw. And it would stay in tune. So I started thinking about the spring, and the I was always afraid of Bigsby. So I spent I think winter 2013 taking Bigsby's apart and seeing if I could find what the flaw was, if there was a flaw, and I came to the conclusion that in the process destroying a custom shop Gibson 335. Or at least its value, because I used that as my prototype guitar for my tremolo experiments, that it was a spring thing. So I just chased down springs from various sources, and I narrowed it down to like 3 or 4, and put a roller bridge on it, and locking machines, and discovered that I had a spring that was longer and softer,
Yeah.
which usually doesn't work for people. But in this case, longer and softer was a good idea. And I'll be here all week trying to veal. Anyway, and then I sent it to Joe Naylor, who had several thousand made, I think, to get them. And correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a company that checked the tensile strength and matched it to the correct diameter because it wasn't the right diameter, and we had a spring that wouldn't fall out when you pulled up, because I'd had that happen
Right.
on more than one occasion when I pulled the bar up, that when I let go of the bar, the spring would be on the floor.
It's definitely a sound, isn't it? The Bigsby. It's
I thought you meant when the spring falls out.
No, I've always I'm a fan of the sort of the sound of a Bigsby trem, but I always struggle to. There's so much physical movement required to get it to do something.
Yeah, there is, but what I discovered was that for myself, I mean, I don't mean to sound like I discovered this for all mankind. I discovered for myself that I liked the fact that I got less pitch change for more movement. I always had this guitar if I wanted that immediate,
that's your
more
sort
brutal.
of your Hank Marvin kind of, you know, very little movement for quite a nice tremolo. Whereas the Bigsby, you've really got to give it some, haven't you? But it creates a different tone and a different sort of vibe.
I don't know. Maybe this picks up a little bit of the slack, literally and figuratively, this spring. But what it let me do was Well, anyway, I went through the whole Bigsby thing, and I arrived at the spring that I thought I like. I'm trying to organize my thought, and but the other voices in my head are getting in the way. And then I started thinking about what pitches I wanted, like where this should be located on the body, and so I moved the Bigsby around on the 335 and drilled some more holes, and then measured it and figured it out. And I knew that I didn't want the volume control to be where it would be on a Strat. I wanted it in line with the bridge.
Yeah.
Because I tend to palm mute a fair amount, and I knew if I had my hand on the bridge, I would always be able to just go straight down to the volume control. So all these little things, and I wanted a kill switch.
Oh, okay.
And I wanted a guitar that had the properties of a 335 without the feedback problem. And I had at one point a B.B. King guitar that had a sealed top.
Yeah.
So
this is semi-solid.
This is
center block, and
this has got a center block like a 335, but it's a semi-acoustic or semi-hollow with no F holes. So then I finally made, I guess, a strong enough case that Ken agreed to bring me for an audience with Joe Naylor at his castle, and
Strong enough case. You asked,
and
I was like, yeah, cool, let's do that.
And so we went to see Joe, and what I had in my head was I wanted some kind of guitar that looked like if you saw a picture of Vic Flick playing on a John Barry soundtrack from the 60s, and he had that guitar, you wouldn't think it wasn't possible.
Yeah.
That so it had this I had this future retro thing in my head, but I wanted it to play like a modern guitar.
Yeah.
And so the usual Reverend things like a graphite nut. This has got it's a white graphite. Locking machines. And while we were at Joe's house, we were looking. He had architectural drawings or not architectural. He had schematics of different guitar shapes, and I thought to myself, well, why not so that it hangs with the whole Reverend catalog. That's not a radical departure. What if we took something like the Sensei, which is here, and just made it a little bit bigger.
Yeah.
And not so big that for some people, like the 335 is too big.
Yeah.
Big enough that it would make me look smaller when I was standing behind it, but not so big that the average person couldn't play it. And so we arrived at the shape, which is really just the horns come out a little bit. And then I wanted a segmented pickguard, which I think initially that was sort of problematic. Couldn't figure out how to do it. And then Joe sent me a drawing like this, but without it being segmented. And I said, well, what if you just segment the horns?
Yeah.
And I was thinking of John Cipollina, who played with Quicksilver Messenger Service, who had SGs that had all this extra cut-up pickguard on it that looked very Batwing-ish.
Yeah.
So there were all these disparate influences that have to do with the cosmetics of the guitar.
I do think that the split pickguard thing is very cool. And that you're not the other artists I think have copied that. Doesn't the Billy Corgan do something similar where they've got the sort of the split? Maybe we shouldn't say that Billy copied it, but as in
no, you can say that.
Okay, Billy copied it, but where you've got this, and it does it. It's like realistically, what is it? It's an entirely aesthetic thing, but it completely it sets the guitar off.
Well,
really
and to me
nicely.
it was a Burns thing.
Yes.
Too,
Yeah.
So which goes back to the Vic Flick thing, and so on my planet everything is fitting together at this point, while we were discussing it, and then the kill switch, which was apparently on, but which is something I like about Gibsons is that I can, and because you don't have that. I've had guitars with the tap switches, but you're going from on to off, so it's hard to make it work rhythmically.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas if you can do the thing like you do on a Les Paul, where you have it off in the up position. But the other benefit and byproduct of this is, especially with a band like The Cure, where there's a history of Bigsby's and jazz masters, you often hear that, that just random jangle.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be able to do that, but a byproduct of that is to be able to.
So you can do that Nashville B-bend thing. I saw you doing that in the jam, and
yeah, you can do it up here too if you want.
but that's always really hurt my finger to do it up here. Is there a little bit less tension down here, so it's easier
it's a lot
to do?
less.
Yeah.
And plus, when we get into the noisier. You can drive the string from behind the bridge. And you kind of hear the pick attack, you kind of don't, but it's...
You'll like this, you should experiment.
I should?
Well, yeah, experiment with this. But I was at Bernie Marsden's recently, and he got his double neck ES 1275 out
and lets the drone strings ring while he's playing.
So he plays the 6 string but with the pickups off, but leaves the pickups for the 12 string on. Yeah. And I kid you not, it sounded like a church organ.
Yeah,
it was just all this natural reverb church organ. It sounded amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm into this kind of idea of playing all the bits on the guitar that you're not really supposed to play to see what happens.
That was one of the things that goes back to Tin Machine. We lived through the 80s where DX7s and all that stuff had come in after the 70s, where it was a hands-on analog world, and you were changing oscillators and pass filters, and it was more organic, and then you went to the digital thing where it was the DX7 and less spontaneous in terms of manipulating sounds in real time.
Yeah.
And then I thought, I started serrating the back of my pick, and I keep sandpaper on top of my amp, so I can use my guitar pick as a bow.
Yeah.
And there's parts in song called The Hungry Ghost, a Cure song, where I actually use the pick as a bow while I'm playing. What I wanted to do was, I felt like inside the guitar there were all of these sounds that it's almost and this probably goes back to art school. It's like, when you take a picture and you blow up an aspect of it. Like you take a picture of a corner of that acoustical tile, and you blow it up, you start to see the beauty in the texture of the object.
Yeah.
And it stops being the object; it just becomes the thing it is. And like the drone strings ringing on the double neck guitar, you hear a church organ. You know, you could look at that and you could see a lunar landscape. I don't know. So my thing was to take all these little microscopic and squeaks and bonks and microphonic sounds and record them as loud as you could and bring them up into the mix. And it's all, but the guitar is the sound source. And in the late 80s, my thing was I wanted to keep the electric guitar alive and viable as something more than just, as much as I love Tom Petty, something you strum, or and that was all part and parcel of the whole thing, which is why those things.
Trying to find a...
Well, look at Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page found the he'd have a space in the mix and he'd find the right crappy sound that would make the whole thing sound brilliant. And it's just to be open-minded to those sonic possibilities is the thing. To go back to the guitar, with this, so Bigsby soft touch spring, as it's become known, locking tuners, bend behind the bridge, but then, and you can also drive. And there's times for all of us where we're playing and we start to lose a note. We think the note's going to sing, it's going to sustain, and it starts to fade. You can get it going again. It's like jump starting your car. But the other thing with this spring is that you can do all the wobbles and things like that. Well, you can actually do things you're not supposed to be able to do with the big spring. So once you get accustomed to the Bigsby and the rate at which the pitch changes, you can do almost everything that you would do with that style tremolo. It's just a matter of familiarity and taste, which one you choose.
Oh, that's cool. Well, look, so what's next then for you? Are you committed to more Cure stuff, or are you?
Oh, I'm a member of the band, so whatever we do next is. Whatever the band decides to do is where I'll be. Writing, and I've got performing. And I've got there's more stuff in the coming year, and there's plus I've got a live record from actually 2 live records, one from Nashville, one from Manchester with my band, which is Reeves Gabrels and His Imaginary Friends, and we're going to put those out at some point this year and do another tour with that based on whatever else I'm doing. So
good for you, man.
And my having just finished the 6-month tour 2 days ago, my current plan is to sit in front of the fireplace and watch the snow fall and talk to the cats and watch old movies. Sounds like the perfect way to spend black Christmas. And white movies. Well, good for you. And look, I'm so pleased you came over and spent some time with us. It's a real pleasure to talk to you about the way you approach music and guitar, and it's been a real education. Lots of fun. No, it has been. Don't try this at home.
No, do try. I think that's the moral, isn't
You
it?
have
Do
to,
try
you have
this
to
at
try
home.
it at home before.
Yeah, do try it at home,
before
not
you-
in front of 70,000 people.
Well, I can't say I haven't done that though.
Well, look, man,
I have tried it in front of.
I do appreciate it, and thanks to Reverend as well for kind of bringing you over. But look, it's been lovely. Thank you so much. And I'll put a link in the description below where you can find out more about Reeves if you want to.
Yeah, that would be great.
And more about the guitars. So look, that's cool. Thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you next time.